recording.
Professor.
Okay, so let's talk about sound design a bit. I'm gonna give some examples as usual and just play some different stuff. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay. So yeah, sound is obviously really important in video games, and it's important to kind of enhance the feeling of immersion in video games. Can't really see this. I thought I updated my notes so that these blue words would stand out more, but looks like I didn't push those changes. Anyway, so sound is used to enhance immersion. This is the feeling that we're like really involved or, you know, sort of like entwined in the game world. You know, in the sort of game design process, probably most of your attention is going to be focused on the graphics, and that's what we kind of, you know, tend to associate with the games. But sound is just as important for the user experience. So we use sound to kind of enhance and reinforce the feedback that we're getting from the game system. So we're going to talk about the use of sound in a few different contexts. Sound effects, music in the game, and then user interface sounds. And those are kind of the three different components that we'll be thinking about. As far as sound effects, a few general rules for thinking about when do we need to add in sound effects into a game. So any collision or interaction between objects that imitate real world physics is typically going to be associated with a sound. So if there's like footsteps or jumping or things that collide or something that falls, or if you get hit by a projectile or run into a wall, all of these different events should probably have a sound that corresponds with them. That kind of gives us the feeling that something's really happening. If we see something, you know, your player colliding or something hitting your player, and then there's a sound that's associated with that, it really reinforces the event that we're trying to give feedback for. Sound should also accompany any change in game state. And so that can mean a lot of different things. If you change levels, if you change scenes, if you click on a button, if you open the menu, all of those things should have some sound that's associated with them. This is just basic user feedbacks to say, like, you know, you clicked on a button and something changes and you hear the sound. These all kind of reinforces each other. And then the last one, a sound should accompany any user input, button presses, mouse clicks, anything like this. Should probably have a sound associated with it. You probably may not even think about this, but if you go into any video game that you play, you know, every time you hit a button or hit the menu button or, you know, really do anything, there's almost always going to be some sound that's associated with that action. So we're reinforcing what's happening in the game system to the player using both visuals and sound. All right, so let's take a listen to a few different examples of sound design in games. So we'll start very early on with Pong from 1972. To go over to YouTube to watch this.
This is a real B&H customer story. Steph Mandis came to B&H to take her photography.
So that's pretty much all we need to hear. There's just a few different sounds there. But you can see what I'm sort of describing is reinforced by, you know, what's happening in this game. There's different sounds for the paddle versus the walls. And then there's another sound that's much longer for when a point is scored. So when a point is scored, that's a more significant event. And so it's punctuated by this longer, louder sound. When the paddle hits the ball, it's a different sound, but it's a very short sound. And when the ball hits the top and bottom walls, then we get another separate sound. So we can always hear what's happening in the game without even really looking at it. If you're just listening to the game, you can hear, where the ball is going, and then you can hear if somebody scores a point. So moving a bit ahead, Sonic the Hedgehog from 1991. You're going to hear now, besides the sound effects, which there's a lot of, there's also background music that's changing as we move through the game.
It is out there.
Sorry, Jordan, did you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
So there's music that's changing as we go through different stages in the game to kind of reinforce where we are in the game. And there's a bunch of different sound effects, and things are constantly kind of changing. So just from those, those first couple of levels, you can see how many different sounds there are. There's music associated with each kind of component. Like in the main playthrough of the game, the music is changing with the melody, sort of changes as we go through. But then we hear the same resolution of the theme when we finish both levels and count up the score. You hear the same musical component that kind of signifies this is the end of the level. And then there's different sounds that are associated with everything that Sonic runs into. And there's even ambient sounds. You might have noticed when Sonic passes by this section of water. So when he passes by that waterfall, we hear this water going. So there's all these different sounds that kind of reinforce what's going on in the environment, both in terms of what Sonic is running into and, points being scored and things like that, but also the background music and environmental sounds. And so this is, not that much later, but we can see that sound design is getting a lot more sophisticated. So this is an excerpt from the game Half-Life, and I'm going to play a bit of a longer excerpt from this one, and you're going to hear all these different environmental sounds that are happening, along with the basic sound effects like the footsteps of the character, there's lots of really, really loud explosions and things like that happening in this game, and there's also very dramatic kind of like background music that's setting up these different scenes as they occur. So you kind of hear the music changing before you actually approach these new levels in the game. So we're going to watch a little bit of a longer excerpt from this one and just try to pay attention to all of the different things that are happening in the sound.
95%. Fracture detected.
Hey, it's not good up there.
Depleted.
So that's a bit of a long one, but I wanted to skip ahead to that ending section. But yeah, so you can see there's a lot of different stuff that's going on in there. And what I really like about this game and the way they do the sound design, besides just the, incredible amount of detail and how everything has all these different sounds and stuff, there's also a lot of dynamics. Like it gets really loud and then it'll get really quiet depending on where you are. You can often hear what's happening in another room as you're approaching it. And then there's also musical cues that are, it's almost like a film where more tense music is occurring when you're about to encounter an obstacle. And at the end of the level, each level has this kind of like triumphant soundtrack that comes in at the end that kind of signifies you're almost at the end of the level. So they're using sound to kind of reinforce a lot of what's going on in the general game design here. So a couple more examples. I showed Braid in our lecture on indie games, but it uses sound in a really interesting way to kind of reinforce the game dynamics as well. So I'll play a quick excerpt from this one. So notice how in that one, when you reverse time, the sound also gets reversed. So that happens in different ways. One of the main game mechanics in Braid is that you can change time in various different ways. And the soundtrack is always reacting to those changes in time. A more modern game that uses sound in a really interesting way is the game Inside. This is an indie game from a few years ago. And it's very dramatic, and it's a sort of stealth game, so it uses sound in a really effective way to reinforce the kind of like scariness of the game and the game mechanics. And you'll also hear how the soundtrack is integrated with the sound effects. So you can kind of see how there's sound effects and then there's music happening in that game, but they also are combined in a really seamless way. So when some sound effects change, the music is also changing at the same time. So it's a really nice blend of different sounds in the game. So a few types of sound effects to think about when you are creating sounds for your game. So we can think about the player, the different things that the player can do, like walking, jumping, attacking, dying. All of these things should probably have a sound related to them. Then characters like NPCs or enemies, they have their own movement, attack, and death sounds. Changes to the game states if you're starting a level or ending a level or opening a menu. Rewards, if you collect a reward or some type of achievement, there should be a sound related to that. And then any UI interactions, whether it's clicking on a button or choosing something from a menu, pausing the game, all of these different things should have a sound effect associated with them. Ambient sounds are sounds that are part of the game that aren't related to, something that's happening with the game states or the user input, but just add to the setting or the environment. So the waterfall sound in Sonic was an example of that. Sounds like rain or wind or traffic or sirens or voices, all of these different things are referred to as ambient sounds, or sounds that don't have like a specific starting point or part of the interaction. Sounds can also be cues, so they can direct the player in different directions. So it could be a voiceover that's literally saying, go to the left, go to the right. It could be footsteps or sounds from other characters that can, tell you that something else is happening somewhere in the game spatially. Also, tense music can kind of cue that you're about to come up to an obstacle or some more challenging part of the game. The only link I have here is to a YouTube video, which covers a lot of the same concepts, the importance of sound in video games. It has a lot more examples, so it goes through a lot of games in the course of this clip. So I'm not going to show the whole thing, but if you're interested in looking at more examples of sound, I recommend checking out this video. There's a lot of different examples in here. And yeah, so we're going to get into actually creating some sounds now. Or finding sounds to use. So I'm going to stop recording for a second and then I'll start again.